The night has a way of softening everything, and as you settle into this quiet moment, there is nothing you need to prepare, nothing you need to solve, nowhere you need to arrive, because the simple act of listening is already enough. Perhaps the lights around you have dimmed a little, or the room has grown still in that familiar way it does late at night. When the world outside begins to loosen its grip, and even the most persistent thoughts start to slow, and if it feels natural, you might allow your breath to deepen. Just slightly, not forcing it, just letting it fall into its own unhurried rhythm, because tonight's story does not ask for attention in the sharp sense, it simply offers companionship like a presence sitting quietly nearby. Tonight, we do not begin with a hero or a great event or a precise moment in history. Instead, we begin with something far more modest and far more patient. Something that has learned how to wait without expectation. A piece of iron, resting in the dark, unremarkable at first glance. Neither polished nor decorative, its surface darkened and smoothed by time itself. Cool to the touch, solid, unassuming, as though it has always been there and will continue to be there long after anyone remembers why. Imagine it now existing without urgency, without narrative, simply present. And as you hold that image gently in your mind, a door opens. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but slowly, as if it has been opened many times before, and beyond it lies a space far removed from the brightness and speed of modern life, a place built of stone and shadow where sound behaves differently and time seems to stretch rather than press. You are standing inside a medieval cathedral, empty and at rest, its tall stone walls rising into darkness above, the air cool and calm, carrying the faint scent of old stone and settled dust, and through narrow, high windows, moonlight drifts inward in pale, quiet ribbons, touching the floor and the pillars as if it too's moving carefully so as not to disturb the silence. In this stillness, iron reveals itself not loudly, but everywhere hinges that allow heavy doors to move with dignity rather than forced clasps that have secured wooden chests for centuries. Railings worn smooth by hands that passed through this place long ago. People whose names have faded, but whose presence lingers in the subtle polish left behind by touch. These iron forms do not announce their age, yet they have been here through generations of change, witnessing candlelight and darkness, voices and silence, prayer and absence, all without needing to adapt their purpose or justify their existence. Their surfaces have changed, yes, but not in a way that suggests decay. Instead, they carry a deep, dark sheen, a quiet gloss that reflects the moonlight softly. A surface shaped not by resistance, but by cooperation with time itself. And there is something deeply reassuring in that, especially if you have ever felt tired of moving too quickly, of needing to stay new and sharp and perfect in a world that rarely pauses. Long before this iron became a hinge, or a clasp, or a rail, it rested hidden within the earth, held by stone and shaped by pressure, over spans of time too vast to measure. And when it was finally drawn into the human world, it arrived without ceremony, guided not by spectacle, but by warmth and rhythm. Picture a small forge, set apart from noise, its fire steady rather than fierce, breathing gently in the dimness, and beside it a blacksmith working without hurry, his movements practiced and calm, raising and lowering the hammer in a rhythm so even it feels almost like a heartbeat, not striking in anger or forcing the metal to obey, but guiding it patiently, allowing it to respond in its own time. The iron is heated, then left to cool naturally in the open air, not rushed, not shocked, simply allowed to find its balance again. And this cycle repeats: warmth, rest, gentle shaping, until the metal begins to understand its role in the world. And what neither the blacksmith nor anyone else at the time could fully explain is that the iron strength would come not from perfection, but from the small inconsistencies left within it, tiny impurities that remain, quiet imperfections that would later help the metal endure. There is something profoundly human in that idea, though no one in that moment would have spoken it aloud. The notion that durability is not always born from flawlessness, but from the ability to exist honestly within time, changing slowly, aging into stability rather than breaking under pressure. As the cathedral rests in moonlit silence and the iron continues its quiet service, a gentle curiosity begins to form. Not sharp, not demanding, but soft and open. About how such simple things can last so long, how they learn to remain without resisting the world around them, and for now there is no need to answer that curiosity. No need to resolve it, because sometimes it is enough to let a question exist resting lightly in the mind, just as moonlight rests on stone, just as breath settles into its own calm rhythm, and just as you, listening now, are allowed to rest within this moment, unhurried and at ease. As the quiet weight of the cathedral lingers gently behind us, the story drifts further back, not by sharp steps or clear dates, but the way memory itself moves when it is tired and unafraid, slipping backward without resistance, following warmth instead of clocks, until the stone walls soften and dissolve into darkness, and what remains is the steady glow of fire, calm and contained, illuminating a small forge where the night air is cool but never hostile, and the flame breathes with a slow, reassuring pulse, expanding and retreating like a living thing that understands restraint. Here, iron begins its journey not as an object of importance, but as a quiet participant in a simple, repeated act, guided by hands that have learned patience through years of listening rather than forcing. The blacksmith does not speak much, if at all, and when he moves it is without urgency, because urgency has no place here. Each step, each turn of the wrist, each moment spent waiting for the iron to be ready unfolds at its own pace, and the hammer rises and falls with a rhythm so steady it becomes almost meditative, a sound that does not intrude but settles into the background like a low, comforting hum. The iron glows softly as it warms, not blinding, not violent, simply receptive, and when it is set aside to cool, it is left alone. Exposed to the open air, allowed to rest and settle without interference, as though rest itself were part of the craft, rather than an interruption of it. There is no rush to finish, no pressure to optimize, no sense that the future needs to arrive faster than it naturally will, and this absence of haste creates a space where the mind can slow without effort, where watching becomes enough, and where even thought begins to soften into something less defined. What is being shaped here is not only metal, but a quiet understanding between material and maker, an agreement that strength will come through cooperation rather than domination, through repetition rather than intensity, and although the blacksmith may not have words for it, his hands move with the knowledge that forcing the iron too quickly would weaken it, just as neglecting it entirely would leave it unformed. And so he works in balance, warming and resting, shaping and waiting, trusting the process because it has always worked this way. Within the iron itself, small inconsistencies remain, tiny traces of what it once was, minute elements that do not fully disappear in the fire, and instead of being driven out completely, they settle into the metal, becoming part of its inner landscape, and it is these quiet remnants, these imperfections, that will later help the iron endure the long companionship of air, moisture, and time. There is something deeply calming about watching a process that does not pretend to be perfect, something reassuring in knowing that what lasts is not always what is flawless, but what is allowed to be whole, including its roughness, and as you listen, perhaps, you can sense your own thoughts beginning to follow a similar rhythm, no longer racing ahead, no longer circling anxiously, but slowing to match the pace of hands that know there is no need to hurry. Outside the forge, the world remains vast and quiet, untouched by the concerns of the moment, and when the iron finally leaves this place shaped, but not exhausted, it carries with it the memory of warmth and rest. A memory that will surface again and again over centuries, as it responds gently to its surroundings, forming a surface that protects rather than erodes, adapting rather than resisting. The idea that something can grow stronger by yielding slightly, by allowing time to leave its mark, is not spoken here, but it is present all the same, woven into every movement, every pause, every breath of the fire. And if you find yourself thinking of your own life of moments when slowing down felt like a failure rather than a necessity, there is no need to analyze that thought or follow it too far, because this story does not ask for conclusions, only for presence. Leaving behind a sense of calm continuity, the feeling that something essential has been set into motion without needing to be finished all at once. Knowing that nothing here will demand effort, that every moment will arrive gently, and that the path ahead will continue to open slowly. As the warmth of the forge fades gently into the background, the iron continues its journey without haste, carried not by urgency, but by quiet usefulness, finding its place in the world where it will spend long years simply being present. And as time moves forward, in its slow, uneven way, the iron begins to learn the language of air. Air is patient, but it is persistent, and it touches everything eventually, not with force, but with consistency, brushing against the surface day after day, season after season, and the iron does not resist this contact, nor does it surrender to it entirely. Instead, something subtle happens, something almost tender in its slowness. As the surface darkens and smooths, forming a protective skin that feels less like damage and more like adaptation. This change does not occur in a moment that can be pointed to or remembered, and no one stands nearby to witness it as an event because it unfolds quietly, invisibly, the way most lasting things do. And if you were to pass by the iron during these early years, you might not notice anything remarkable at all, only that it looks calm, settled, as though it has accepted where it is meant to be. Inside, the cathedral iron becomes part of the architecture of stillness, holding doors that open and close with a steady uncomplaining grace, securing railings that guide hands safely along worn paths, existing not as decoration but as quiet support. And over time, countless moments pass through this space without leaving more than the faintest trace, a touch here, a pause there, a breath held briefly in the cool air before moving on. The iron absorbs these moments without recording them in any obvious way. Yet they become part of its story all the same, embedded not in memory, but in presence, in the way it continues to do its work without drawing attention, without needing recognition. There is something deeply restful about objects that know their purpose and do not question it, that do not need to change constantly to remain relevant. And as you listen, perhaps your own thoughts begin to mirror that steadiness, drifting less toward what must be done tomorrow and more toward what simply is right now. The iron does not fear the passing of years, because years do not arrive all at once. They come quietly, one after another, like breaths, and each one leaves behind only the smallest mark, barely noticeable until much later someone looks closely and realizes how much time has passed. This gradual transformation creates a surface that protects the metal beneath, a kind of quiet agreement between material and environment, where neither seeks to overpower the other, and instead they move forward together, slowly, patiently, without conflict. If you have ever felt worn down by the idea that time only takes and never gives, this image offers a gentler perspective, suggesting that time can also smooth, stabilize, and strengthen if allowed to work at its own pace. The cathedral itself seems to understand this, standing unmoved by centuries of weather and change, its stones settled into their places, its silence deepened rather than broken by age, and within this shared stillness, the iron feels at home. There is no dramatic moment when its importance is realized, no sudden recognition of its endurance, because endurance does not announce itself. It reveals itself only when everything else has moved on. As night after night passes and the moon continues its quiet arc across the windows, the iron remains, absorbing coolness, releasing warmth, existing in a steady rhythm that mirrors the rise and fall of breath. And as you follow this rhythm, your own body may begin to respond, muscles softening, thoughts lengthening, awareness spreading out rather than tightening around any single idea. You do not need to hold on to this story or remember its details, because its purpose is not to inform but to accompany, to offer a pace that your nervous system can trust. And as the iron settles deeper into its long conversation with air and time, the sense of curiosity that once hovered gently in the background begins to feel less like a question and more like an acceptance, a quiet understanding that not everything needs to be examined or resolved. Some things are meant to be experienced, slowly absorbed without effort, and carry forward not as knowledge, but as a feeling of calm, continuity, and as this realization drifts through the silence of the cathedral, it brings with it a deeper sense of ease. The kind that comes when you realize that nothing in this moment is asking you to hurry, that time is moving gently beside you, rather than pushing you forward, and that it is safe here and now to let yourself rest within that steady, unbroken flow. As the cathedral continues to rest in its long, unbroken silence, the iron quietly reaches a moment that is not a moment at all, but a gradual realization that unfolds so gently it feels more like a deepening than a change, because over the years, without intention or announcement, something remarkable has been happening at its surface. The iron has not remained exactly as it was, yet it has not weakened either, and this quiet transformation is not driven by effort or control, but by a kind of cooperation with the world around it, as air, moisture, and time meet the metal again and again, leaving behind a thin, stable layer that settles into place like a well-worn coat. No one in the cathedral notices this process while it is happening, because there is nothing dramatic to see, no flaking or crumbling, no urgent need for repair. Only a subtle deepening of color, a smoothing of texture, a sense that the iron has learned how to exist comfortably within its environment. If someone were to ask why this iron endures while other metals weaken more quickly, there would be no simple answer offered here, no technical explanation or precise terminology, because the truth of it is less about naming and more about feeling, less about control and more about allowance. The iron has not tried to remain new, and it has not fought the slow touch of time. Instead, it has adapted in small, almost invisible ways, allowing change to arrive in manageable increments, each one absorbed rather than resisted, until the surface itself becomes a form of protection. There is something quietly reassuring in this, especially if you have known the exhaustion of holding yourself rigid against every passing season, every unexpected shift, every gentle demand for adjustment, because the iron offers another way of being, one that does not require hardness to survive. Within the cathedral, this lesson remains unspoken, carried instead through atmosphere and presence, through the way the iron feels cool and settled beneath a resting hand, through the way it does not creak or strain as doors open and close, but moves smoothly, confidently, as though it trusts the rhythm it has learned over time. Outside, centuries pass without ceremony, bringing with them rain and dryness, warmth and cold, and the iron meets each change without alarm, responding slowly, steadily, forming and reforming its surface in a continuous conversation with the air. If you listen closely to this process, not with your ears but with a quieter kind of attention, you may begin to sense how different it feels from the way modern life often asks us to move, constantly adjusting, constantly reacting, rarely resting long enough to settle into ourselves. Here, in this ancient space, nothing is in a hurry to become something else, and the iron's endurance feels less like an achievement and more like a natural outcome of patience. The realization that strength can emerge from gentleness, that resilience does not always announce itself with force, arrives softly, without demanding agreement or action, and you are free to let it pass through your awareness without holding on to it. As the moonlight shifts across the stone floor and the night deepens, the iron continues its quiet work, existing as it always has, and as you follow this unbroken continuity, your own breathing may begin to slow even further, each inhale and exhale settling into a comfortable rhythm that feels supported rather than directed. There is no need to remember the details of this discovery, no need to repeat it to yourself or turn it into a lesson, because its purpose is not to teach but to soothe, to offer an image of stability that your mind can rest against. In the gentle understanding that some things grow stronger by yielding rather than resisting, there is room for your own thoughts to soften, for expectations to loosen, and for the night to continue unfolding without interruption, carrying you gradually toward a deeper sense of ease, where curiosity becomes calm acceptance, and where simply listening is enough. As the night settles even more deeply around the cathedral, there comes a point when curiosity itself begins to loosen, not because every question has been answered, but because the need to ask them quietly fades, And the iron, still and dependable, continues to exist without commentary, without explanation, as though it has long since learned that endurance does not require understanding. Time moves through this space without ceremony, passing gently over stone and metal alike, and the iron no longer feels like an object being observed, but like part of the atmosphere itself, as natural and unobtrusive as the cool air resting against the walls. There is a particular comfort in this kind of presence, the comfort of something that does not demand attention, yet offers reassurance simply by remaining. And if you allow yourself to rest within that feeling, you may notice how your own thoughts begin to behave differently, becoming less insistent, less eager to reach conclusions, more willing to drift without direction. The iron has no awareness of how long it has been here, no memory of the hands that shaped it or the fire that warmed it, and yet those histories are held within it, all the same, not as stories but as quiet facts of being embedded so deeply they no longer need to be remembered. This is what happens when time is given room to work slowly, when nothing interrupts the process with urgency or fear. And as centuries pass, the iron does not accumulate tension or weariness, only a deeper sense of belonging to its place. The cathedral breathes around it, expanding and contracting with changes in temperature, with seasons moving gently through the stone, and the iron adjusts without resistance, responding just enough to remain at ease, never more than necessary. There is no effort visible here, no struggle to maintain form, only the steady continuation of a role that has become second nature. And as you listen, you may begin to sense how unfamiliar this kind of ease can feel in a world that so often celebrates effort over rest. Motion over stillness answers over silence. Yet here, silence is not empty. It is full of continuity, full of reassurance, full of the understanding that not everything needs to move forward at once. The iron has learned to trust the pace of time, to allow it to pass without attempting to measure or manage it, and in doing so, it has discovered a kind of freedom that does not come from control but from acceptance. If you find yourself drawn to this idea, there is no need to follow it anywhere specific, because this story does not ask you to change or decide anything, only to notice how it feels to imagine a life, or even just a moment, where time is no longer something to keep up with, but something to rest alongside. As the moon continues its quiet journey across the windows, the light shifts subtly, casting softer shadows that seem to blur the edges of the space, and the iron, unchanged by this movement, remains exactly where it is meant to be. In this gentle continuity, the boundary between past and present grows thinner, not because time has collapsed, but because it has relaxed, allowing moments to flow into one another without sharp distinction. Your own awareness may begin to do the same, drifting between listening and resting, between noticing and simply being, and there is no wrong place to land within that drift. The iron does not mind if it is noticed or forgotten. It does not measure its worth by attention. And there is a quiet lesson in that, one that does not need to be spoken to be felt. As the night deepens and the world outside grows even more distant, this sense of unasked questions, of unanswered thoughts resting peacefully where they are, becomes an invitation to let go of the need for resolution, to trust that some things unfold best when left alone. And in that trust, carried gently by the steady presence of iron and stone, there is room for your mind to soften, further for your breathing to deepen, naturally, and for the story to continue its slow, reassuring movement forward, unhurried and unbroken. As the questions continue to fall away on their own without being answered or replaced, the cathedral itself seems to settle more deeply into the night, as though it too is aware that nothing further is required. And within this shared stillness, iron and stone exist, together in a quiet partnership that has lasted longer than memory can easily hold. Stone carries the weight of the walls and arches, absorbing centuries of weather and touch, while iron provides its silent strength at the joints and thresholds, never competing, never drawing attention, simply supporting what needs to be supported. And there is a sense that both materials understand their roles so completely that effort has become unnecessary. Time passes here not as a force, but as a presence moving gently through the space, cooling the air, softening the edges of sound, and allowing everything to rest into itself more fully, and as this happens, the iron continues to respond in small, almost imperceptible ways, adjusting to temperature, releasing and holding tension with an ease that feels practiced rather than learned. There is no moment when the iron decides to endure. Endurance is simply what happens when resistance is absent, and this idea drifts through the quiet like a thought. You don't need to finish a sentence that trails off comfortably before reaching a conclusion. The cathedral has seen countless nights like this, nights when nothing changes and everything continues, and within those nights, iron has remained exactly where it is needed, neither rigid nor fragile, but balanced its surface, carrying the calm patina of age, a texture that suggests not decay but familiarity. If you imagine running your hand along it, you might feel how smooth it has become, shaped by countless small interactions rather than any single defining event. And there is something deeply grounding in that sensation. The feeling of continuity that does not depend on memory or meaning, but simply on presence. As the hours pass, the boundary between listening and resting may begin to blur for you as well, thoughts slowing, to the point where they no longer feel separate from the atmosphere of the story, and that is perfectly natural because this journey is not meant to be followed step by step but absorbed, the way warmth spreads gradually through a room. The iron does not ask anything of the night, and the night does not demand anything of the iron. They coexist without expectation, allowing one another to be exactly as they are. And in that mutual allowance, there is a kind of quiet harmony that does not need to be noticed to be felt. If you find yourself drifting in and out of awareness, catching fragments of images or phrases without holding on to them, that is not a sign of distraction, but of alignment, a sign that your mind is beginning to trust the pace being offered here. The cathedral remains unchanged by this trust, standing patiently as it always has, while outside, the larger world continues its distant motion, unheard and unfelt within these walls, and iron remains the quiet link between stability and flexibility, strong enough to hold, gentle enough to adapt. There is no lesson being delivered, no insight waiting to be uncovered, only the steady reassurance that remaining does not require effort when time is allowed to move freely. And as this understanding settles into the silence, it brings with it a deeper sense of ease, one that invites you to let go even further, to rest, not just your body, but the part of your mind that is always reaching ahead. In this place, there is nothing ahead that needs reaching, nothing behind that needs revisiting, only the ongoing presence of materials that have learned how to stay without strain. And as you listen, you are welcome to share in that quiet skill, letting the story hold you gently as it continues to unfold at its own unhurried pace. As the cathedral remains suspended in its calm, unbroken quiet, something begins to shift, not in the space itself, and not in the iron that has held its place for so long, but in the way the story gently turns its gaze, offering a softer angle rather than a sudden revelation, because the most meaningful discoveries rarely arrive with force. The iron, steady and unassuming, has never known why it endures, and yet its endurance has quietly outlasted countless moments of human certainty, countless plans and beliefs that once felt permanent and later faded without notice. This realization does not arrive as a shock, but as a quiet opening, like a window easing wider to let in cooler night air. And it invites a different way of seeing time, not as a line rushing forward, but as a wide, patient presence that allows many things to exist at once. Within this perspective, the iron stillness no longer feels passive, but deeply active in its own subtle way, because remaining, when done without resistance, requires a kind of trust that is easy to overlook. The cathedral has been a gathering place, a refuge, a threshold between inner and outer worlds, and through all of these roles, iron has served without adapting its identity to match the meaning others placed upon it, holding doors, guiding hands, supporting weight regardless of what the space represented at any given moment. There is something quietly beautiful in that neutrality, the way the iron does not define itself by the stories told around it, but by the simple act of being reliable, present, and consistent. If you allow this thought to rest within you, you may notice how rarely modern life encourages such steadiness, how often it asks for reinvention, acceleration, constant response, and how tiring that expectation can become over time. Here, In this ancient stillness, a different rhythm is offered, one that suggests that value does not always come from change, and that remaining can be just as meaningful as becoming. The iron does not measure the centuries it has known, and yet those centuries have shaped it into something quietly strong, not by adding layers of protection, but by allowing its surface to grow into harmony with the air that surrounds it. This cooperation, this gentle dialogue between material and environment, feels less like a strategy and more like a natural outcome of patience. And it opens a space for reflection that does not demand answers, only presence. As the night deepens, the cathedral seems to hold this understanding within its walls, offering it freely to anyone willing to sit with it. And as you listen, perhaps you can sense how your own attention is beginning to soften, no longer fixed on individual words, but drifting through the overall feeling of the story. That drift is welcome here, because the purpose of this journey is not to be followed closely, but to be felt gradually, the way warmth spreads slowly through your hands, or the way drowsiness arrives without announcement. The iron remains exactly where it has always been, and yet through this subtle shift in perspective, it feels newly alive, not because it has changed, but because it has been seen differently, and this too is a gentle truth of the night. That sometimes nothing needs to change for something to feel new. As the moonlight continues its quiet movement across stone and metal, shadows soften and edges blur, and the distinction between observer and story begins to fade, leaving behind a sense of shared stillness, a calm that does not depend on understanding or effort. In this softened awareness, the iron's long existence feels less like a marvel to be explained, and more like a presence to be trusted. And as that trust settles, it carries with it an invitation to release the need for constant motion, to allow yourself to exist for a while without direction or expectation. The night does not ask you to go anywhere from here. It simply holds the space open, letting this gentle twist of perspective widen into something spacious and reassuring, where time feels less like a measure and more like a companion, and where remaining, for now, is more than enough. As the sense of motion continues to soften and the night grows heavier with calm, the story itself seems to lower its voice, as though history, having spoken long enough, has decided that whispering is now more appropriate, and within the cathedral's enduring stillness, iron remains present not as an artifact to be examined, but as a companion to silence, a quiet witness that has learned how to exist without narrating its own importance. Over the centuries, countless people have passed through this space, each carrying their own concerns, hopes, and questions, and yet, none of those inner worlds have disturbed the iron's steady presence, because it has never required understanding to fulfill its role. It has listened without hearing, observed without watching, remained without remembering, and in doing so, it has become part of a deeper rhythm that moves beneath individual lives, a rhythm that feels less like history as we usually imagine it, and more like a long, continuous breath. This is the moment when history stops feeling like a sequence of events, and begins to feel like atmosphere, something that surrounds rather than confronts, something you can rest within without needing to trace its edges. The iron does not tell stories of kings or conflicts, of rise or collapse. Instead, it carries a quieter record, one made of nights like this, of uncounted hours when nothing happened and everything endured. And there is a particular peace in that kind of continuity, especially for a mind that has spent the day navigating urgency and decision. As you listen, you may notice how your own thoughts have begun to thin out, no longer forming complete narratives, but drifting as impressions and sensations, and this too is part of the story's movement. A gentle invitation to let meaning loosen its hold. The cathedral seems to respond to this softening. Its vast interior, holding the quiet like a deep pool, holds still water, and iron, settled into its place, feels less like an object within that space, and more like part of its structure of calm. There is no pressure here to learn or remember, no expectation that this moment will lead somewhere else, because the value of this experience lies not in what it produces, but in how it feels to remain within it. If you imagine the centuries passing beyond these walls, they do so without urgency, layering gently upon one another, and the iron meets each passing year with the same quiet acceptance, adjusting slightly, responding just enough to remain at ease and then settling again into stillness. This adaptability is so subtle, it often goes unnoticed, carries a quiet wisdom, one that does not announce itself as advice, but simply exists as an example, suggesting that endurance does not require constant vigilance, only a willingness to meet change without fear. As the night deepens further, the distinction between listening and resting grows, increasingly faint, and you may find that words arrive and fade without leaving a clear trace, their rhythm more important than their content, their presence more significant than their meaning. That is exactly where this story intends to carry you. Into a space where effort gives way to ease, where understanding becomes optional, and where history itself feels like a soft backdrop rather than a subject demanding attention. The iron remains, the cathedral holds its silence, and the night continues its gentle work of quieting the mind, allowing awareness to widen and then soften, like a horizon slowly dissolving into darkness. In this space, there is no need to hold on to anything you hear, no need to follow each thought to its conclusion, because the story is no longer moving forward in the way stories usually do. It is settling, deepening, becoming something you can simply rest within. And as history learns to whisper, its voice blending seamlessly with the rhythm of your breath, the sense of being carried gently towards sleep grows stronger, not through force or suggestion, but through the simple reassurance that nothing here will ask more of you than you are already giving, which is only your quiet presence in this moment. As the whisper of history settles almost completely into silence, the story begins its slow return, not by moving forward or backward, but by sinking gently into the present moment, where the cathedral, the iron, and the night exist together without distinction. And the sense of time that once felt expansive now feels soft and close, like a blanket resting lightly over everything it touches. The iron no longer stands out as a subject of attention. It has become part of the stillness itself, as natural and unobtrusive as the cool air that drifts through the stone corridors. And in this shared quiet, there is a feeling that nothing more needs to happen for the night to feel complete. The cathedral holds its shape without effort, its walls familiar with darkness, its spaces comfortable with emptiness, and iron continues its quiet companionship, supporting, connecting, remaining, without needing to be seen or acknowledged. As you listen, your awareness may begin to settle even more deeply into your body, into the steady rhythm of breathing, that no longer requires guidance, into the subtle sensations of rest that spread gradually rather than all at once. And this settling is not something to manage or encourage, but something to allow the way you allow yourself, to sink into a comfortable chair or into sleep itself. The centuries that once felt present now feel distant again, not because they have disappeared, but because they no longer ask for attention, leaving behind only a sense of continuity, the quiet reassurance that things can last without being held tightly. Iron has learned this lesson, well, not by studying it, but by living it, existing year after year without needing to adapt its purpose to changing meanings, and there is something deeply calming in knowing that such steadiness is possible. The night outside the cathedral deepens further, and the moonlight that once traced clear shapes across stone and metal now grows softer, more diffuse, as though even light is growing tired and ready to rest. In this dimness, edges blur, distinctions fade, and the space feels less defined, more like a feeling than a place. And as this happens, the story gently loosens its hold on structure, allowing sentences to stretch and drift, allowing images to overlap and soften, creating a rhythm that mirrors the natural descent into sleep. There is no longer a need for curiosity, no remaining tension to resolve, only the quiet presence of something that has endured and continues to endure, without effort, offering a model of rest that does not depend on stopping, but on allowing. If your thoughts wander now, if they drift away from the iron and the cathedral and into fragments of memory or sensation, that is entirely welcome, because this part of the journey is less about listening and more about resting alongside the story as it gradually dissolves into the background. The iron remains, of course, just as it always has, but it no longer needs to be imagined, clearly because its presence has already done its work, providing a sense of stability that can now be carried inward rather than held in the mind. As the hours continue to pass quietly, unseen and uncounted, the sense of being held by something steady grows stronger, and the story's movement slows to the point where it feels almost still, like a calm surface beneath which everything else can finally settle. There is no message here to remember, no lesson to carry forward into the morning. Only the gentle understanding that rest does not need justification, that stillness is not something to earn, and that allowing yourself to drift is sometimes the most natural response to a day that has asked for too much. The cathedral rests, iron rests, the night rests. And within this shared quiet, you are invited to do the same, to let go of the need to follow words or images, to trust that the story will continue to hold its shape, even if you stop listening consciously. As awareness softens further, becoming less focused and more diffuse, the sense of time fades almost entirely, leaving behind only a calm open space where breath moves easily and the body feels supported, and in this space the story's presence becomes more like a background hum than a narrative, something steady and reassuring that does not require attention. This is the moment when returning to stillness no longer feels like an action, but like a natural state, a quiet arrival at a place that has been there all along, waiting patiently, just as iron has waited, just as the cathedral has waited, offering its calm without condition. And as this feeling settles, it carries you gently toward the final quiet of the night, where nothing further needs to be said, and nothing more is asked of you than to rest. As the night reaches its deepest calm and the story prepares to rest alongside you, everything within the cathedral feels settled into a gentle equilibrium, as though stone, iron, air, and darkness have found a shared understanding that nothing more needs to unfold for this moment to be complete. And the iron that has accompanied us throughout this long, unhurried journey remains exactly where it has always been, not as an object to be considered, but as a quiet presence that has already done what it came to do. The sense of time that once felt expansive now feels almost weightless, like a thought that dissolves before it finishes forming. And in this softened awareness, the boundaries between past and present fade until they no longer matter, leaving only the sensation of being held within something steady and kind. The cathedral does not echo now. It absorbs sound, holds it gently, allowing silence to deepen without becoming empty. And iron continues its patient companionship, offering support without expectation, strength without display, endurance without effort. If you imagine the centuries that lie behind this place, they no longer feel heavy or distant, but calm and settled like layers of quiet snow, resting evenly upon one another. And the knowledge that something can last through so much change without needing to harden itself against the world carries a particular comfort at this hour. Your listening may have become lighter by now, drifting in and out of focus, catching phrases without holding them, and that is exactly as it should be, because the story's purpose has never been to keep you awake, only to walk beside you until rest feels natural again. The iron does not follow you. It remains, and yet its steadiness is something you can carry with you without effort, a reminder that remaining does not require vigilance, that strength can be quiet, and that time when met gently can become an ally rather than a pressure. As the night continues its slow movement beyond the cathedral, the world outside feels distant and unimportant, its concerns softened and postponed, and within this calm interior space there is nothing left to process, nothing to resolve, nothing to anticipate. If you notice your breathing now, it likely moves on its own, unhurried and deep, and your body may feel heavier, more settled, as though gravity itself has grown kinder, and this settling is not something to guide or improve, only something to allow. The story has become a background presence, like the low glow of a lantern left burning through the night, offering reassurance without demanding attention. And in this gentle light, it feels safe to let go of the day entirely. If you wish, you might recall a time when you looked up at the night sky and felt a similar sense of peace, a moment when the vastness above made everything else feel small in a comforting way, and you can let that memory drift through you without holding on to its details, allowing it to blend with the quiet images of iron and stone and moonlight that have carried you here. When was the last time you looked up at the night sky and felt at peace without needing anything more from the moment than what it already offered, and if that question feels too distant or abstract, you can let it pass knowing it does not need an answer tonight. Here no one rests alone. Every story is a soft lantern in the dark, and this one has been lit simply to accompany you, to remind you that endurance can be gentle, that history can be kind, and that rest is something you are always allowed to return to. If tonight's story reminded you of a beautiful memory, you are welcome to share it when you feel ready, and if this quiet journey brought you a sense of calm, you might leave a gentle comment for yourself, a small marker of having been here, even if no one else ever sees it. And if you would like to return to this calm again on another night, don't forget to subscribe for more peaceful nighttime journeys with tedious history for sleep, where stories are told slowly without urgency and always with care for the quiet hours. For now, there is nothing left to listen for, nothing left to imagine clearly, because the iron remains, the cathedral rests, and the night continues to hold everything softly, inviting you to drift fully into sleep, trusting that the world will remain exactly where it is, steady and patient while you rest within this final gentle stillness. Night has a way of arriving without announcement. It simply settles slowly, kindly like a blanket drawn over the edges of a long day. If you're listening now, perhaps the room around you is already dim. The sharp lines of furniture soften. The air feels a little heavier, a little warmer. Even the silence has a texture to it, gentle, breathable, unhurried. You don't need to do anything special tonight. There's nothing to remember, nothing to solve, nothing to follow perfectly. This story will move at the pace of a calm heartbeat. And if at any moment your thoughts drift elsewhere, that's not a mistake. That's part of the journey. Before we drift deeper into tonight's gentle journey, remember to subscribe to Tedious History for Sleep. Here, you'll always find peaceful stories that soothe the heart and quiet the mind. Where are you listening from tonight? Leave a comment. Your presence adds warmth to this quiet corner of the night. Now, let your shoulders drop just a little. Allow your jaw to unclench. And if it feels comfortable, take a slow breath in through your nose and let it leave you without effort. Tonight, we will wander through history, not through battles or dates, not through the loud moments that demand attention, but through the softer spaces history often forgets to mention. We will visit the places where time learned to whisper. Imagine for a moment a single lantern, not a bright one, not a harsh flame, just a small, steady light warm gold, steady, reliable, swaying slightly in the night air. This lantern doesn't hurry. It doesn't flicker with urgency. It simply glows patiently. And wherever it passes, the world becomes quieter. We begin in a place that feels enclosed and safe. A stone chamber, deep within a medieval city. The walls are thick-built not only to keep danger out, but to hold warmth in. The stone remembers heat. It releases it slowly, long after the fires have dimmed. The air smells faintly of dried herbs, lavender, rosemary, perhaps a hint of something resinous and sweet. Somewhere nearby, oil lamps hum softly, their flames steady and well-fed. This is not a room of urgency, it is a room of pause. Here, history rests. Inside this chamber sits a woman history knows is powerful, but tonight, power is not the story. Tonight, she is simply tired. Isabella of Castile, though names are unimportant here, rests in a wooden chair carved smooth by years of use. Her crown is absent, her posture has softened. The weight of decisions, of voices, of expectations has been set aside for a few quiet moments. She holds a small cup between her hands. Steam rises slowly, curling and dissolving before it can form a thought. She does not rush to drink. She inhales first. Because even centuries ago, people understood something simple and true, that comfort begins with breath. Outside these walls, the world continues busy, demanding, unresolved. But inside this chamber, time behaves differently. Here, moments stretch. Seconds feel generous. As Isabella lifts the cup, her shoulders lower almost imperceptibly. A sip. Warmth spreads, not dramatically, not suddenly, but gradually, like dawn easing into the edges of night. She sits, she breathes, she waits. And in that waiting, history reveals something tender. Across centuries, across continents, across cultures, the most powerful people in the world all discovered the same quiet truth. Even power needs rest. The lantern moves again. Now we find ourselves far from Castile, drifting eastward, carried not by urgency but by curiosity. The kind of curiosity that doesn't demand answers, only presence. We enter another chamber. This one feels different. The ceiling is higher. The light softer, filtered through silk curtains that breathe with the night air. Incense smolders nearby, releasing a scent that feels almost blue-cool, calming, ancient. Here sits Theodora, Empress of Byzantium, not addressing crowds, not shaping laws, just existing. Her hands rest loosely in her lap. Jewels remain, yes, but tonight they are quiet, reflecting lamplight instead of attention. She closes her eyes. In this stillness, her thoughts do not argue. They drift. They settle. Perhaps you've known moments like this too. Moments when the world doesn't disappear, but steps back, respectfully. If you have ever sat alone in the evening, listening to nothing in particular, then you already understand this part of history. The lantern glows brighter, not louder, not sharper, just clearer. And something gentle begins to emerge. A realization, moving slowly enough that it doesn't wake the mind. History is not only made in moments of action. It is also shaped in moments of stillness. Decisions soften when minds rest. Perspectives widen when bodies relax. Even empires needed rooms like these. The lantern drifts again. Now we stand beneath a sky open, wide, endless. Stars scatter themselves across the darkness without pattern or urgency. This is Olympia, but not the Olympia of roaring crowds or triumphant victories. This is Olympia at night. The games have ended for the day. Torches burn low. The ground still holds warmth from the sun. Athletes sleep. Spectators whisper. The world exhales. In this place long ago, people agreed quietly, collectively, to pause conflict. Not forever. Just long enough to breathe together. The truce was not loud. It was gentle. A shared understanding that rest, too, had value. As moonlight washes over stone and earth, wreaths of olive leaves rest nearby, not symbols of conquest, but of presence. Victory here is simple. To arrive. To participate. To return home whole. And in this quiet realization, something soft clicks into place. Maybe history's most enduring legacy isn't dominance or expansion. Maybe it's the moments when humanity remembered how to be gentle. The lantern slows. Its glow becomes softer. And now, very slowly, it turns toward you. You don't need to follow it with your eyes. You don't need to hold on to any image. Just let the feeling remain. A sense that even across centuries, even across unfamiliar names and places, the rhythm is the same. People worked, people worried, people rested, and rest was always allowed. As this part of the story begins to fade, notice your breath again. Slower now, deeper. You are safe here, unrushed, unobserved. In the next part, we will continue drifting through more quiet rooms, through soft discoveries hidden in the margins of history. But for now, there is nothing to do. Just rest where you are. Tonight, the lantern moves again, not with haste but with a patient certainty, gliding through corridors of time where footsteps have long since faded, and as it goes, the world continues to soften around you. The edges of thought growing rounder, less defined, like stones smoothed by water over many years. We arrive in another room, another quiet refuge that history rarely pauses to describe, because nothing dramatic happens here, and yet everything important does. The room belongs to Frederick, an emperor known in records for sharp intellect and restless ambition, but those traits remain outside the door tonight, set down gently like a heavy cloak. Inside, the air feels different, faintly cool, touched by night mist drifting through an open window. Candlelight trembles just enough to remind the eye that it is alive. The ceiling arches above, painted long ago with patterns meant to suggest heaven, And as Frederick reclines, his breathing slow and unguarded, something curious begins to happen. The ceiling seems to move. Not truly, not in any way that needs explaining, but in the soft way things do when the mind loosens its grip on certainty. The patterns rise and fall, as if the room itself were breathing along with him. In this moment, power dissolves into sensation. The Emperor is not ruling. He is resting. And perhaps you know this feeling too, the way familiar walls can seem to expand and contract when you are on the edge of sleep, the way the mind begins to paint gentler meanings onto ordinary shapes. Frederick does not question it. He lets it happen. History often forgets to tell us this, but even the most commanding figures learned, at night, to surrender. The lantern drifts onward, carrying this softness with it, and now we find ourselves somewhere warmer, where the night air carries the scent of water and flowering plants. A bathhouse, long after voices have left, steam still clinging to stone like a memory unwilling to fade. Here, centuries ago, people came not only to clean their bodies, but to slow their thoughts. Pools reflect lamplight in lazy ripples, and each ripple seems to carry away a worry, a plan, a name. Someone steps into the water, slowly, carefully, respecting the transition from air to warmth. The muscles yield, the breath deepens, and history, once again, becomes intimate. There are no speeches echoing here, no proclamations carved into stone. Only the shared human understanding that warmth heals, that stillness restores. As the lantern lingers, a realization begins to settle, gentle as dust. Across cultures and eras, people built spaces like this not for luxury, but for survival. Rest was not indulgence, it was maintenance. Without it, nothing endured. If your thoughts are beginning to wander now, drifting toward your own memories of warmth, of quiet evenings or slow mornings, that is perfectly fine. You are following the same path. The lantern moves again, and the world opens outward, leaving enclosed chambers behind. We stand now beneath a vast sky, the kind that humbles without frightening, the kind that invites the eyes to relax because there is nothing they must focus on. Stars scatter themselves freely, unconcerned with pattern or purpose. In ancient times, people lay beneath this same sky, not to calculate, not to predict, but simply to feel small in a comforting way. To know that worries had edges, but the universe did not. Somewhere nearby, a small fire crackles, steady and predictable. Its rhythm does not demand attention. It offers companionship. Someone stirs embers, then stills, content to watch the glow settle back into quiet. This too is history. Not the history of conquest, but the history of presence. Of people who paused long enough to notice the way night sounds deepen when the world sleeps. Crickets marking time. Wind brushing leaves together. The low murmur of distant water. The lantern's light softens further now, and it reveals a truth that feels less like information and more like reassurance. The past was not always loud. Much of it was spent exactly like this, in pauses between obligations, in moments where nothing needed to happen for life to feel complete. And as this understanding spreads, it gently invites your body to follow. Perhaps your breathing has slowed without instruction. Perhaps your jaw feels heavier, your eyelids warmer. That is not something you are doing. It is something you are allowing. The lantern begins its slow return, not backward, but inward, carrying with it the warmth of rooms, the hush of bathhouses, the steady breathing beneath painted ceilings. These are not stories meant to be remembered in detail. They are impressions, like the feeling of a place you once loved but no longer need to name. And as this part of the journey draws to a close, there is no cliff, no tension, only an open doorway leading deeper into rest. In the next part, we will follow the lantern further, into the gentle discoveries hidden in rituals and shared silences. But for now, there is nothing required of you. Simply remain where you are, supported by the quiet knowledge that even history knew when to rest. Just as we left those quiet chambers behind, the lantern continues its unhurried path, carrying with it the warmth of stone walls, the echo of slow breathing, and the understanding that nothing needs to be held too tightly tonight. Its light does not cut through the darkness. It blends with it, becoming part of the night itself. And as it drifts, the world feels less like a series of places and more like a continuous exhale. We arrive somewhere that feels both familiar and distant, a space shaped not by walls but by ritual. A small table stands near an open window, the wood worn smooth by countless hands over centuries. Upon it rests a simple bowl, steam rising lazily, scented with herbs whose names have softened with time. This is not a moment of discovery meant to impress. It is a moment meant to soothe. Long ago, people understood that certain plants carried stories of their own, stories that did not need to be explained to work. Mandrake, chamomile, lotus, lavender, names whispered rather than announced. Prepared slowly, taken without urgency. Someone lifts the bowl, pauses, breathes in the aroma, and in that pause, the mind begins to loosen its grip on the day. History often records what was built, conquered, or declared, but it rarely lingers on these quieter acts of care. Yet these rituals happened every night, in homes grand and humble alike. They were threads of continuity, tying one generation to the next, through the shared language of comfort. The lantern glows a little warmer now, and with it comes a soft realization. Much of history survived not because people pushed harder, but because they knew when to soften. As this understanding settles, the scene shifts gently, like a tide changing direction without announcing itself. We are no longer focused on one person or one room, but on a pattern repeating across time. A scholar setting aside his scrolls as the oil lamp dims. A healer rinsing her hands, letting warm water carry away the weight of listening all day. A traveler unrolling a mat beneath unfamiliar stars, finding rest in the simple fact of having arrived somewhere safe. These are not dramatic moments. They do not demand attention, and that is precisely why they are powerful. They teach the nervous system something ancient and reassuring. Rest is allowed. If you notice your own thoughts becoming less distinct now, like shapes seen through fog, that is not something to resist. It is a sign that the mind is beginning to trust the night. The lantern drifts onward, and with it comes a soft discovery, one that does not shock or surprise, but instead feels like remembering something you always knew. Even the grandest civilizations were held together by small, repeating comforts. By warm drinks at night, by shared silences. By the agreement, unspoken yet universal, that when darkness came, the world could slow down. In one corner of history, a ruler sips a familiar infusion, not thinking of policy but of warmth. In another, a farmer listens to the steady breathing of animals settling for the night. In another still, a child falls asleep to a story told so often that its words blur into reassurance. None of these moments needed to be recorded to matter. They mattered because they happened. The lantern's light dims slightly now, not because it is fading, but because your eyes no longer need it to be bright. The images it reveals are softer, less defined. A curtain moving gently in night air. The quiet clink of ceramic placed carefully on wood. The distant sound of water flowing somewhere beyond sight. These details do not ask to be remembered. They ask only to be felt. And as the feeling deepens, a quiet reflection emerges, simple and kind. Comfort, it seems, is the softest kind of chain. Not one that binds, but one that anchors. It keeps us from drifting too far into worry, too far into effort. It reminds us that we belong to a rhythm older than obligation. This reflection does not need agreement. It does not need analysis. It can simply pass through like a thought you notice just before sleep, then let go. The lantern pauses, hovering as if listening. And in that pause, it invites you to notice your own body again, without changing anything. The weight of your head supported, the gentle rise and fall of your chest. The way stillness feels when you are no longer waiting for something to happen. This is the same stillness people found centuries ago when they set down their tools, their titles, their worries, and allowed night to do what it has always done best. As this part of the journey draws to a close, there is no conclusion to reach, no lesson to carry forward actively. There is only a sense of continuity, a gentle thread running from past to present, from their quiet rituals to yours. In the next part, we will follow the lantern into a wider space, where shared pauses became shared values and where peace was practiced not loudly but together. Until then, remain where you are, held by the understanding that rest has always been part of the human story, and it is part of yours tonight as well. The lantern resumes its gentle motion, carrying forward everything it has gathered so far: the warmth of rooms, the memory of slow rituals, the reassurance that rest has always existed alongside effort. And as it moves, the night seems to widen rather than deepen, opening into a space where quiet is not solitary but shared. We arrive again at Olympia, though not as a destination marked on a map, but as a feeling that settles softly in the chest. The ground here is cool beneath bare feet, smoothed by countless passages over time, and the air holds a subtle echo, as if it remembers voices long after they have chosen silence. The games are finished, the crowds dispersed, and what remains is something far gentler than celebration. Torches burn low, their flame steady and obedient, casting long shadows that stretch without urgency. Somewhere nearby, a small group sits together, not speaking, simply present, aware of one another in the way people are when nothing needs to be proven. In ancient times, this quiet agreement was known as a truce, but here it feels less like a rule and more like a shared breath. For a little while, conflict was set aside, not resolved, not erased, but paused. And in that pause, something human had room to unfold. The lantern drifts closer, illuminating simple details that history often overlooks. A hand resting on the ground, fingers splayed to feel the earth's remaining warmth. A slow stretch after long hours of movement. The gentle clink of a cup being set down, empty now, its purpose fulfilled. These are the moments that stitched people together, not through triumph, but through mutual stillness. The concept of arete, often translated as excellence, takes on a different shape here. It is not about winning. It is about showing up fully, then knowing when to rest. Doing one's best, and then allowing the night to take over. This understanding does not announce itself loudly. It settles in gradually, like a realization that arrives just as sleep begins to approach. Perhaps you have felt something similar in your own life, a moment when striving soft into acceptance, when effort gave way to presence. The lantern seems to sense this recognition and slows further, as if honoring it. The scene begins to blur at the edges, not because it is fading, but because the mind no longer needs sharp outlines. Faces become impressions, voices become warmth. Time becomes circular, looping gently rather than moving forward. In this softened space, the past feels less distant. People from centuries ago are no longer figures in stories, but companions in rest, sitting quietly under the same kind of sky you might see if you looked up tonight. Stars wheel overhead, indifferent to eras, offering the same calm perspective to everyone beneath them. The lantern tilts upward briefly, acknowledging that vastness, then returns its focus to the ground, to the human scale where comfort lives. It reveals a simple truth, one that feels steady rather than surprising. Peace, when it appears, is usually quiet. It does not arrive with announcements or demands. It is practiced gently, in shared pauses, in mutual respect for the need to slow down. This truth does not need to be carried forward as a lesson. It can simply be felt, then released. As the lantern begins to drift away from Olympia, it does not feel like leaving. It feels like carrying something forward, a softness that can exist anywhere. The images dissolve gradually, replaced by a sense of spaciousness, as if the mind itself has room to breathe. If your thoughts are becoming fewer now, more distant, like lights seen through mist, that is perfectly natural. You are moving with the same rhythm this story has followed all along. The lantern's glow dims once more, and with it comes a gentle invitation, not spoken aloud but understood. There is no need to stay alert. No need to hold on to any particular image. History has offered its quiet companionship, and now it steps back, trusting you to rest. As this part of the journey settles, notice how stillness feels when it is shared across time, when it belongs not just to you, but to countless others who pause like this before sleep. In the next part, the lantern will guide us even further inward, toward reflections that dissolve into comfort rather than thought. Until then, remain exactly as you are, supported by the calm certainty that even in the vast flow of history, moments like this were always enough. The lantern does not rush away from Olympia. It simply continues as if carried by the same breath that rises and falls in your chest and the quiet it leaves behind. Does not feel empty but complete, like a sentence that does not need another word added to it. As it drifts onward, the world around it grows softer still, less concerned with place, and more attuned to sensation, to the slow unfolding of awareness that happens when the mind no longer tries to hold everything together. We pass through landscapes that are not sharply defined but gently suggested a shoreline, where waves arrive without urgency and leave without regret. A narrow path through tall grass that bends and straightens with the passing breeze, a simple dwelling with a single window glowing faintly in the night, offering reassurance rather than invitation. These are not scenes meant to be explored, only noticed, the way one notices the weight of a blanket or the steady presence of the ground beneath the body. In this part of the journey, history becomes less about events and more about continuity, the long, unbroken habit of humans finding ways to settle themselves when darkness falls. Long before written records, people learned the language of night through repetition, through fire tended carefully, through songs hummed low enough not to disturb sleep, through stories told not to excite but to soothe. The lantern carries these echoes forward, and as it does, they begin to feel strangely familiar, as though they are not being introduced, but remembered. Somewhere long ago, someone sat by a fire much like the one you might imagine now, watching embers pulse gently, red to orange to ash, and in that watching, the day loosened its hold. The same thing happens now in a quieter way, within you. Thoughts that once seemed important drift to the edges, becoming less insistent, less sharply outlined. The lantern seems to respond to this softening, its glow spreading wider but dimmer, illuminating not objects but atmosphere, a sense of spaciousness where nothing needs to be named. We move through centuries without marking them, through cultures without distinguishing them, because the experience remains the same. A person lying back against cool stone after a long day, feeling the steadiness beneath them. Another listening to rain tap gently against wood, counting nothing, waiting for nothing. Another feeling sleep approach like a tide that does not need to be chased or resisted. History in this telling is not a line but a rhythm, repeating, dependable kind. The lantern pauses beside a quiet dwelling, somewhere between forest and field, where a door stands slightly ajar to let the night air circulate. Inside, a simple room waits, containing little more than a low bed, a folded cloth, and the soft scent of dried plants hanging from a beam. No one speaks here. There is no need. The room understands its purpose. It exists to hold rest. As the lantern's light drifts across the space, shadows move slowly, stretching and shrinking without drama, and the feeling is not one of watching, but of belonging. If you imagine yourself here, you do not feel like a visitor. You feel like someone who has always known how to arrive. This sense of arrival deepens as the lantern resumes its path, now less a guide than a companion, content to move alongside rather than ahead. The world outside the room grows quieter still, as if sound itself is learning to rest. Even the night seems to slow, stars appearing to hold their positions just a little longer, as though aware that nothing needs to progress. In this slowed state, reflections arise naturally, without effort, gentle thoughts about time and its softness, about how many nights have passed like this, unnoticed, unrecorded, yet essential. The realization comes without weight. Life has always contained these pauses, these long exhales between moments of effort, and it is often here in these pauses that healing quietly happens. The lantern's glow now feels less like light and more like warmth, something you sense rather than see, and it invites you to notice the same warmth within your own body, the subtle comfort of stillness, the reassurance of being supported. There is no instruction to breathe deeply or relax further. Those things are already unfolding on their own. The lantern simply bears witness as you follow the same pattern people have followed for as long as nights have existed. As the journey continues, scenes blend together gently. A field becomes a shoreline. A dwelling becomes a tent beneath open sky. A fire becomes a candle, then simply a memory of warmth. This blending is not confusing. It is soothing, like the way thoughts merge just before sleep, losing their edges, becoming impressions rather than narratives. The lantern does not resist this merging. It allows itself to fade slightly, trusting that its presence is no longer necessary in the same way. And in this trust, something within the listener is invited to trust as well, to let go of the need to follow, to understand, to stay awake for what comes next. History, having offered its quiet companionship, now steps back with respect, leaving space for rest to take over. The long exhale of time continues, carrying you gently, steadily, toward deeper stillness. There is no ending here, no moment where something stops. There is only a gradual settling, like dust after a long journey, like water after a stone has passed through it. And as this part of the story comes to rest, the lantern remains nearby, its light barely perceptible now, not because it is gone, but because you no longer need it to see. Everything you need is already present in the quiet, in the softness, in the simple permission to sleep. The lantern, now scarcely brighter than a thought, continues alongside you, not leading, not following, simply present, and the quiet it carries feels settled rather than empty, like a room after a long conversation has ended kindly. The world no longer shifts in clear scenes. Instead, it breathes in textures and sensations, the kind that do not ask to be named. A distant shoreline murmurs without insisting on rhythm, waves arriving and leaving as they have always done, teaching patience without instruction. The air holds a mild coolness that rests comfortably on the skin, neither waking nor chilling, just enough to remind the body that it is held by the night. Somewhere unseen, a tree moves slightly, leaves brushing one another in a language older than words, a sound that reassures simply by repeating itself. History, at this depth, becomes almost indistinguishable from the present moment. The people who once listened to these same sounds are no longer separate figures. They are part of the same continuity, the same long pause stretching gently across centuries. You might sense them not as individuals, but as presence, as the collective understanding that night is a time for easing, not striving. The lantern drifts through this shared quiet and pauses near a simple structure, one that feels familiar no matter when it existed, walls close enough to feel safe, a roof that keeps the sky from feeling too vast. Inside, there is very little, because very little is needed, a place to lie down, a surface that supports without comment, a faint scent of wood and earth that grounds the senses without drawing attention. This is the kind of space people return to night after night, trusting it to receive them exactly as they were. As the lantern's warmth spreads through the room, it reveals nothing new, only the comfort of recognition. The body understands this kind of space instinctively. Muscles soften not because they are told to, but because there is no longer a reason to stay alert. The mind, too, begins to adopt this simplicity, letting go of distinctions that felt important earlier, allowing thoughts to pass through like distant lights glimpsed from a moving train. There is no need to follow them. They move on their own. In this quiet, reflections arise gently, not as questions, but as acknowledgments. That life, across time, has always balanced effort with rest. That even in eras marked by hardship, people found ways to create moments like this, moments where the world was allowed to be enough as it was. The lantern seems to absorb these reflections, its glow dimming further, not from fading, but from having done its work. Outside the structure, night deepens, but it does not grow heavier. It becomes softer, more enveloping, like a familiar coat worn many times before. Stars are present, though they no longer ask to be counted. They simply exist, steady and patient, offering perspective without demand. Somewhere water moves slowly, its sound smoothing the edges of awareness, encouraging the same unhurried flow within you. The lantern resumes its motion briefly, then slows again, as if sensing that movement itself is becoming unnecessary. History, in this moment, offers one last gentle understanding, not spoken, but felt. That what endures most is not what was built or claimed, but what was repeated quietly, night after night, breath after breath. The simple acts of settling down, of trusting the dark, of allowing sleep to arrive without negotiation. This understanding does not need to be held consciously. It can sink beneath the surface, becoming part of the background hum of safety that supports rest. The lantern's presence is now almost indistinguishable from the warmth of the room, from the steadiness of the ground beneath you. It does not announce its departure, because it does not truly leave. It simply becomes unnecessary, like a light turned off once the eyes have adjusted to the dark. The quiet that remains is complete on its own. If there is any sense of drifting now, any feeling of edges dissolving, that is exactly as it should be. You are following the same gentle arc that countless others have followed before, moving from awareness into rest without crossing any sharp boundary. There is no moment where you must decide to sleep. Sleep arrives when it is ready, and until then, stillness is enough. The room, the night, the history woven softly around you all remain patient. They do not expect anything from you. They do not need acknowledgement, they simply hold. As this part of the journey settles fully, the story no longer needs to guide or describe. The quiet does that on its own. The lantern, now fully absorbed into the atmosphere, leaves you with nothing to follow and nowhere to go. Only the steady reassurance that rest has always been here, waiting kindly, and that tonight, like so many nights before, it is enough to let it take over. The lantern, now scarcely brighter than a remembered feeling, continues beside you without direction or destination, and the quiet it carries has settled into something deep and dependable, like the calm that follows a long, gentle sigh. Nothing urges it forward, nothing pulls it back. It simply exists within the night, and the night seems content to hold it there. The world around you no longer arranges itself into clear scenes or distinct places. Instead, it becomes a soft field of sensations, the kind that do not require attention to be felt. A shoreline murmurs somewhere far away, waves arriving and retreating with no concern for time, their rhythm steady enough that the mind stops counting. The air carries a coolness that rests lightly on the skin, not sharp enough to wake you, not warm enough to distract, just present, just enough. Leaves brush against one another in the distance, their sound neither loud nor quiet, simply consistent, like a reminder that movement can exist without urgency. At this depth of stillness, history dissolves gently into the present moment. The people who once listened to these same sounds no longer feel separate from you. They are not characters or names, but traces of the same human need to pause, to soften, to be held by night. Across centuries, across cultures, the pattern repeats without effort. Day gives way to evening. Effort gives way to rest. Thought gives way to quiet. The lantern drifts toward a simple structure, one that feels familiar regardless of when it stood. Its walls are close enough to feel protective, its roof low enough to feel secure. Inside, there is very little, because very little has ever been required for rest, a place to lie down. A surface that supports weight without question. The faint scent of wood, earth, and something dry and herbal lingering in the air. This is a room that understands its purpose completely. It does not impress. It does not display. It simply receives. As the lantern's warmth spreads through the space, it does not reveal objects so much as it reveals permission. Permission for muscles to loosen, for breath to deepen naturally, for the mind to stop scanning for what comes next. The body recognizes this kind of space immediately. Shoulders sink. The jaw relaxes. The small muscles that hold the day together begin, one by one, to let go. Thoughts still arise, but they no longer insist on being followed. They drift past like distant lights seen through fog, present for a moment then gone, leaving no trace that needs explanation. In this quiet, reflections surface gently, not as questions or conclusions, but as simple acknowledgments. That life has always required these pauses. That even in times marked by uncertainty or effort, people found ways to create moments like this, moments where nothing needed to be solved. Night after night, they returned to familiar spaces, trusted familiar rhythms, and allowed sleep to arrive when it was ready. The lantern seems to absorb this understanding, its glow softening further, not dimming from weakness, but from completion. Outside the structure, night deepens without becoming heavy. Darkness here is not something to push against. It is something that wraps gently, like a well-worn blanket. Stars remain overhead, though they no longer ask to be noticed. They exist quietly, offering scale without demanding attention. Somewhere nearby, water moves slowly, perhaps a stream or a distant tide, its sound smoothing the edges of awareness, encouraging the same unhurried flow within you. The lantern resumes its motion for a moment, then slows again, as if recognizing that movement itself is no longer necessary. History offers one last gentle presence here, not as a lesson, but as reassurance. That what endured most across time was not noise or urgency, but repetition. The steady return to rest. The simple act of lying down. The trust that the dark would hold without harm. This reassurance does not need to be held in thought. It settles naturally, like warmth spreading through the body, like breath finding its own rhythm. The lantern's presence now blends completely with the room, with the night, with the quiet inside you. It does not announce its departure, because it does not truly leave. It becomes unnecessary, like a light turned off once the eyes have adjusted to darkness. The quiet that remains is full, not empty. If there is a sense of drifting now, of edges dissolving, of awareness spreading thin and wide at the same time, that is the natural continuation of this journey. There is no moment when you must choose sleep. Sleep arrives gently, on its own schedule, and until it does, stillness is enough. The room remains. The night remains. The long, patient rhythm of human rest continues, uninterrupted. Nothing is expected of you. Nothing is required. You are held, quietly and completely, by the same calm that has carried people through countless nights before this one. The lantern has nearly vanished now, not extinguished but absorbed so completely into the quiet that it no longer feels, separate from the night itself. And what remains is a calm so steady it seems to have always been there waiting, patiently beneath every busy moment of the day. The world at this stage no longer presents itself in images that ask to be seen clearly. Instead, it becomes a field of sensation, subtle and continuous, like the awareness of your own breathing when you are no longer thinking about it. Time loosens its shape here. Minutes do not line up behind one another. They drift, overlap, soften, becoming something closer to a feeling than a measurement. This is the part of the night where history stops narrating and simply rests beside you, content to share the same stillness. Somewhere far back along the path we have traveled, there were rooms and rituals, stone walls and warm drinks, shared pauses beneath ancient skies. Now, those details have dissolved into a single understanding, simple and kind, that the human story has always included this moment, the moment when nothing more is asked of you. The quiet around you does not feel empty. It feels settled, like a lake after the last ripple has faded, its surface smooth not because nothing has touched it, but because everything has finally come to rest. Sounds still exist, but they are distant and gentle, no longer asking for interpretation. Perhaps a faint hum of air moving through space, or the low, almost imagined murmur of something far away. These sounds do not interrupt the silence. They belong to it. The body responds in its own way, gradually, without instruction. Muscles release their final unconscious efforts to hold posture. The space behind the eyes feels warmer, heavier. Thoughts arrive less frequently now, and when they do, they carry no urgency. They are like clouds seen from a great distance, drifting slowly enough that you do not feel the need to watch where they are going. In this state, reflection becomes unnecessary, but a gentle awareness remains, like a soft light behind closed eyelids. It carries a reassurance that feels deeply familiar, even if it cannot be traced to a single memory. It is the reassurance of countless nights that ended this way. Nights when people lay down and allowed the dark to do its quiet work. Long before electric light, before clocks measured hours so precisely, night taught humans how to surrender. It taught them that rest did not need to be earned through exhaustion alone, but was part of a natural cycle, as reliable as the setting of the sun. This teaching did not come through words or rules. It came through repetition, through the simple act of stopping. The lantern, if it can still be said to exist, rests somewhere within this understanding, no longer guiding, no longer illuminating, simply present as a memory of warmth. History itself feels like it has exhaled fully now, releasing the need to be observed. The past does not lean forward to instruct. The future does not press in with expectation. There is only this wide, gentle now, stretching comfortably in every direction. If there is a sense of floating, of being supported without effort, that is the night doing what it has always done best, holding without gripping, allowing without pushing. You may notice that the boundary between listening and resting has grown thin. Words no longer arrive as something to follow, but as a texture passing through awareness, like the feeling of fabric against skin or the distant warmth of a fire that no longer needs tending. This is not a place where conclusions are drawn. It is a place where things are allowed to remain unfinished, unresolved, and perfectly fine as they are. Somewhere within this calm, a final, quiet truth settles, not as a thought but as a sensation, that you are not late, that you are not behind, that for this moment simply being here is enough. History does not measure you. The night does not judge you. They simply accompany you to the edge of rest and then step back, trusting sleep to arrive in its own time. The quiet stretches on, generous and unbroken. There is no signal marking the end of the story because the story has already fulfilled its purpose. It has slowed, softened, and made space. Whatever comes next does not need guidance. If sleep arrives now, it will do so gently, without announcement. And if awareness lingers a little longer, that is fine too. The night is patient. It has always been patient. You are held within it, just as countless others have been held before, wrapped in the same calm that has traveled silently through history, night after night, breath after breath, until nothing remains to be done except rest. The night continues without marking its progress, and in this quiet stretch of time, there is no sense of moving forward or backward, only a deepening ease, as though the world itself has settled into a more comfortable position. What remains of the lantern is no longer an image, but a feeling, a soft internal glow that does not illuminate objects, only reassures, and it rests easily within the calm that surrounds you. At this stage of the journey, history no longer presents itself as places or moments, but as a shared condition, the universal experience of reaching the end of the day and allowing the body to be carried by rest. Across centuries, people arrived here in different ways, some after long travel, some after quiet labor, some after days filled with thought, others after days shaped by routine, yet they all arrived at the same threshold, the moment where effort could finally loosen its hold. The quiet you are in now feels similar to the hush that settled over villages. Once lamps were dimmed and doors were closed. When the last footsteps faded and only familiar sounds remained, the occasional creak of wood, the soft breath of animals settling, the distant murmur of water or wind. These sounds did not demand attention then, and they do not now. They exist as a backdrop of reassurance, reminding the nervous system that nothing unexpected is required. In this softness, the mind begins to do what it does best when left alone. It organizes without effort. It releases without instruction. Thoughts may still appear, but they no longer form lines or arguments. They come as fragments, impressions, feelings without names, and then they drift away, leaving behind a growing sense of space. This space is not empty. It is supportive, like the space within a room that allows you to stretch comfortably, or the space beneath you that holds your weight without comment. The body responds naturally, sinking more fully into whatever supports it, breath slowing in its own rhythm, heart finding a steady, unremarkable pace that does not need to be monitored. History, at this depth, offers no new insights, only companionship. It reminds you quietly that this state has been visited countless times before, that the night has always known how to guide people here without force. In eras without clocks, people trusted this transition implicitly. Recognizing the subtle signs, the heaviness in the limbs, the warmth behind the eyes, the way sounds seemed farther away. They did not analyze these sensations. They accepted them, just as you are doing now, perhaps without even realizing it. The gentle return to stillness does not arrive all at once. It unfolds gradually, like a long, unhurried descent into calm water, where each layer brings a deeper sense of ease. The surface concerns of the day are already far above, no longer visible, no longer relevant. What remains is the simple awareness, steady and untroubled, aware without effort. If there is a sense of floating or drifting, it is not something to hold on to. It will continue on its own. The night supports it fully. In this quiet, a final reflection appears, not as a thought to be examined, but as a feeling that settles gently in the chest. That rest is not something borrowed from tomorrow or earned from yesterday. It exists only here, only now, and it has always been available. This reflection does not require agreement or understanding. It can pass through unnoticed and still do its work. The lantern, now entirely integrated into the atmosphere of calm, no longer serves as a guide. Its role has been fulfilled. What remains is the steady presence of night itself, patient, generous, unchanging. The sounds around you, whatever they may be, blend seamlessly into this presence, becoming part of the same soothing pattern. Even silence feels textured now, layered, alive in its own quiet way. The boundary between listening and sleeping grows thinner, almost transparent. Words lose their edges. Meanings soften. Awareness spreads gently, no longer focused on any single point. This is not a moment to arrive at. It is simply a moment to pass through, carried by rhythms older than thought. If sleep arrives here, it will do so naturally, without announcement. If it takes a little longer, that too is perfectly fine. The night is in no hurry. History is in no hurry. They remain with you, offering nothing but the permission to let go. And as this part of the journey settles fully, there is nothing left to add, nothing left to explain. The quiet holds on its own, complete and sufficient, carrying you gently toward rest, just as it has carried so many others before, night after night, until waking became a distant concern and stillness was enough. The quiet that has gathered around you now feels complete, as though the night has finished arranging itself and found a shape that requires no further adjustment, and within this shape there is a sense of gentle continuity, a feeling that nothing new needs to begin and nothing old needs to end. If there is still a trace of the lantern, somewhere it exists only as a memory of warmth, a familiarity that does not draw attention to itself the way you might remember a comforting presence without needing to see it. At this depth of calm, even history loosens its form, no longer a sequence of moments, but a slow, steady current that has always carried people toward rest. Across centuries, nights ended like this more often than not with resolution or certainty, but with quiet acceptance, with bodies settling and minds releasing their grip on the day. Villages once dimmed their last lights and trusted the dark to hold them. Travelers lay beneath open skies and let unfamiliar sounds become part of a temporary home. Scholars closed their books, knowing the words would still be there tomorrow. And farmers listened to the land grow still, confident that morning would return in its own time. These moments were rarely recorded, yet they formed the foundation of human endurance. The night you are in now feels connected to those countless other nights, not through detail, but through sensation. The same easing of muscles, the same softening of attention, the same quiet agreement between body and dark that it is safe to let go. Sounds, if they appear, do so gently, without edges. A distant hum, a faint movement of air, perhaps nothing at all. Silence itself feels layered, rich, supportive, as though it has weight without pressure. The body responds by sinking more fully into stillness, each breath unremarkable and steady, no longer something to notice, simply something that happens. Thoughts may still pass through awareness, but they are thin now, almost transparent, like reflections on water that disappear as soon as they form. There is no need to follow them. They know how to leave on their own. In this space, reflection becomes unnecessary. Yet a quiet knowing remains, a sense that you are exactly where you need to be, doing exactly what is required, which is nothing at all. History offers no final lesson here, only companionship. A reminder that rest has always been a shared human practice, something people return to night after night, trusting it even when days were uncertain. The night does not ask for productivity or insight. It offers permission instead, permission to pause completely. Permission to exist without effort, permission to drift. The boundary between story and silence has now grown so thin that it hardly matters which side you are on. Words no longer arrive as information, but as a gentle texture that blends into the background of awareness. Meaning softens, structure dissolves. What remains is a wide, calm presence, untroubled and patient. If sleep arrives here, it will do so quietly, without signal or announcement, simply slipping in as naturally as breath slips out. And if awareness lingers just a little longer, that is fine too. The night does not rush its own rhythms. It holds space without expectation. As this final part of the journey settles, there is nothing left to add, nothing left to guide. The story has already done what it came to do. It has slowed the mind, softened the body, and reminded you, gently and without demand, that you are not alone in this quiet. Here, no one rests alone. Every story is a soft lantern in the dark, and even as the lantern fades, its warmth remains. If tonight's journey brought you a sense of calm, you may leave a gentle comment for yourself when you are ready. If a memory surfaced, you are welcome to share it. And if you wish to return to this quiet again, remember to subscribe to Tedious History for Sleep, where peaceful stories wait patiently, night after night. For now there is nothing more to do. The night is wide, the quiet is kind, and rest, in whatever form it takes, is already finding its way to you.